What's up, dudes?
What's up? Yeah, this is this is the first episode of the pod.
Yeah,
We've been
buddy.
so if you go back, it actually might be deleted now because my Facebook account got deleted. But there was a post. This is probably about like what 45 days ago, 30 days ago, 45 days ago now. When we first posted James, when we first talked for the first time, and I'm like, "Yo, Zach, where the hell are you at?" You know what I'm saying? And then
That's right.
everyone starts jumping in, and like then there's Sergio and Franklin and like everyone else. And so what ended up happening was we kind of pulled Zach in and we're like, dude, we should totally create like a GHL Wizards podcast. And so we've been talking about it for a while, about a month now, I think, maybe a little bit longer than that. And so now this is the first episode. We've been kind of dragging our feet a little bit. A whole bunch of next Thursday. It's going to happen next Thursday.
Next Thursday.
Yeah,
and
we're
so
all
now we're
busy,
finally
man.
here.
So what is it? What's it going to be? What's this going to be about?
Zach, do you want to say you want to break it to the audience?
Yeah, I might just hold it back from them for just a second. No, I'm just kidding. No, man. So we so I think between the three of us, like just as like a back story before the reveal of what the topic's going to be is, the common thread that the three of us share is we're all, in the GHL community pretty deep. And we're all helping people inside the community, nonstop. That's what we all do.
Yeah.
And so, when we kind of bonded together with GHL Wizards, the question between the three of us was, like what is this going to be about? Like all like not just this episode, but like this channel.
Mm-hmm.
And, in what way can we all three, contribute with what we're all doing individually to like bring some kind of like, collective value to the community and stuff like that. And, what we realized is like, because you guys have probably seen all three of us in the group, in the comments, like all over the place. And so, we're always watching, what people are asking about. Yeah, we're watching, waiting, and and with anticipation.
I was gonna say that there's a decent chance that you might stump one of us, right? But like I come to these are the guys I come to for questions, and we all like this is like the mind meld of GHL, and so the chance that you could like stump all three of us on something would be that's why we're here, is because putting our heads together to solve problems.
Yeah, you could probably stump one of us, but if you could stump all three of us at the same time, bring it on.
Stump James and Zach, but you're not going to stump me.
Yeah, exactly, dude. Not with that crazy background.
No, this background, dude, how could you possibly stump me when I have a background like this?
Exactly, man. So anyway, So we see things that the community are asking about on a regular basis. And obviously we all know GHL really well at this point as well. And so, and being that we
how long you've been
GHL
using
people,
GHL, Zach?
Since 2020 for me.
What month?
It was in the springtime, so it was probably like March.
I think I started in like August or September. What about you, James?
I don't know for sure, but since last year.
Okay, cool. All right. Nice. Sorry, Zach. You can continue.
No, man. So, yeah. So in the GHO world, we see common threads, in the community, like questions that people ask over and over again, areas where people get really tripped up, and some of the answers to those questions have pretty cut and dry responses. Like they're like somebody asks an easy question 100 times in the community, or 100 different people ask the same question, and it's just an easy response. But then there's other things that are, they require more discussion. There's more like of a method to the madness. People aren't sure if it's an art or a science exactly, and those are the types of things that we thought would be cool to bring to you guys, a discussion between the three of us so that you can see us kind of hash it out in real time and figure out like where we actually land on some of these things. And that brings us to the very first topic that we decided that was good to discuss. So,
drum roll.
We're going to talk about snapshots, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes,
And
sir.
what do you so I'm going to stop for a second talking, and what, like, when we say snapshots, like, what do you guys like? Open your minds and your hearts and tell me what's inside.
Zach, here's the thing. I think that if in this conversation we can kind of create a kind of series of standards for people to use when they're either creating snapshots to resell or creating it for themselves, we can really help a whole lot of people out. And I think that by having this conversation, we're going to help out people who are brand new and who are just getting started, kind of understand how this whole thing works, and how high level should be formatted in order to be maximally powerful for their business. But it's also going to help freelancers who maybe are used to using other platforms, right? They understand how high level works, but maybe they don't know how to create a snapshot and deliver it and have a really happy customer, right? And so there are certain kind of tips and tricks that I know I have learned. That's what I'm bringing to the conversation. I know, Zach, that you learned. I know, James, that you've also had experience with this as well, which is, when we're speaking to people and they say, well, I bought a snapshot from so-and-so, but, really it kind of left me with more questions than answers.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think if we can answer, or if we can kind of define a way of creating snapshots and creating high level builds that can solve this problem, make it more intuitive, then I think that we're going to be helping a lot of people out. So that's kind of what my hope is for this conversation, for sure.
Yeah.
What do you think, James? You looked like you were about.
I was just to say, yeah, because I've just in my using the snapshot, I was thinking like every snapshot build needs to kind of have a walkthrough demo video, and I was thinking it would be so cool if I could just take a snapshot of the members area, right? And so like embedded in the snapshot is the members area, but then I found myself like needing to do a training on how to install the snapshot and find the members area, and I was just like, forget it. Like, does that make, like, you see the conundrum there, right? Like, so I stopped doing that. I stopped doing that, even though I thought it would be like, oh, that's so genius. Like, let me just embed the training of this snapshot in the snapshot. Anyways, I'm sure we'll talk about best practices, but stuff like that, right? Like,
yeah. And that's where it's like, I really think that a done with you approach is usually the best, approach to selling a snapshot. It's not really just here, click this link and then you're good to go. Right. There is an onboarding element. If you want the person that you're selling it to be successful, then there is an onboarding element that needs to be considered. And so that's where, if you were to include the membership portal into the actual high level account, as a part of setup, you'd be iframing in as a custom menu link. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. The other thing was like just knowing whether or not like custom values and custom fields, like the data does not come across, right? So I had a snapshot build that I wanted the data to come across. And so unless I had proved it out, you almost need, if you're going to sell a snapshot, you almost need to install it on a friend's account with them once, and see what comes across or not, right? Because the data, the value of a custom value doesn't come across in snapshots.
So that's really interesting. And I think that that's where, there's different ways that you can hack it to make it do what you want. If it was something that I was doing as a client who was going to be underneath my agency, then I could just have them fill a form with all the information and then have that go ahead and carry over all the data, the custom values and stuff through an external automation, right?
Right.
But what do we do when that's not the case, right? If I have a snapshot that I'm selling to somebody who's on a completely different account, then it's not so easy, right? You could say, well, I could just create a form at the level of the sub account, or something like that, or maybe at the level of the agency, in the agency sub account or something like that, and then have a integrity automation, but then that's so many extra steps. So I think that that's where it's more of the same of what we were talking about before in terms of having in that training area a series of onboarding videos, and that's if you're not doing that onboarding with them, right? But I think that if you're a freelancer, probably the best idea is to actually onboard the client with them with a done with you setup, right? To just to get it started, and then kind of hand them those resources to have as well.
Let me tell you guys a story real quick.
Yes, please.
And I think this is gonna, so when I think through all of the content like I've seen, for a couple of years, like in the high level group about snapshots and like the variety of questions, both sort of like philosophical almost in nature and also technical in nature. One of the things like I've realized that it makes me think of kind of like my first experience into snapshots, which is just as a tiny bit of background, like, I come from the tech industry. These guys know that, but y'all watching this don't know this, but I come from the tech industry. I did product management for years. And so it's like, I've used all the platforms. I've used them all, not every single one, but like almost any web app that you can think of, like, I have a workflow on that app. So anyway, when I entered the high level world, I was like initially not intimidated because I was like, yeah, like I've used all the apps, like I got this down, but when I got in the high level, I was like, whoa, like it really caught me off guard, like how much was there. And that was like in 2020, like a long time before everything that's even there now.
Yeah.
But above everything else, like people kept talking about snapshots, this, snapshots, that, this and that. Like when I jumped in the community when I was brand new, and I was like, what is everybody talking about? Like I don't understand like what a snapshot is, like people were selling them. I was like, what are they selling? I was just trying to get my brain around it. And when I realized like essentially that the entire state of an account from like front to end could be bundled up, like you could basically take like everything that you had built through an entire account, and like templatize it, turn it into a package, and then like just give somebody a link. Like I was like sort of like my gas was flabbered, and I was also sort of like horrified at the same time. And the reason why like I was horrified was because I realized like, to get a full end-to-end setup and high level, like it has to touch every kind of like part of the customer journey, that like every type of touch that a business has like with their customer. Like if you were to fully maximize high level, like you would have touched them across like every aspect of that journey. So all that to say, like there's a lot of business process involved. And so I was like, okay, so people are bundling up businesses and giving them to each other is kind of what's happening. You know what I'm saying? Like
exactly.
and that kind of like was amazing. And it freaked me out at the same time because, I was like, okay, so like there's a bunch of people saying you should run it this way. You should run your business this way. You should do this or whatever. And, sometimes like that was done with a lot of thoughtfulness in terms of like, okay, this is the process that the business is going to have, the transformational process that they're going to have to go through to like make this work. But then there was other times where it was done more carelessly, and it's like, they have no idea like what the impact to the actual business is to make these changes that they're asking them to make, And so there's kind of this concept of like out of touch, in touch with, the business's processes, and not only that, but like their own customers' journey. And so anyway, that's kind of like, for me, like when I first started getting the snapshots, I was like, that's what I was obsessed about. And I was like, okay, so from that point, I have to figure out what snapshots mean to me now, like in that context, you know what I mean?
If I can interrupt a little bit, I think the value of a snapshot, like not a day goes by that someone says, does anyone have a med spa snapshot? And it's like, well, what, like you can make it. I mean, you can make a snapshot, but like and also people say, no, I don't want you to build it. I want it to be tried and true. I mean, what does that mean? It means a snapshot that I'm actually running business through. That's when they say tried and true, it means like the bugs have been worked out and you've made the thing better. I mean, we all have like iterated on all of our stuff, right? A snapshot you've been using for a year versus 2 years. I mean, night and day difference. What's a snapshot worth? I mean, it could be worth $5,000-$10,000. I mean, who knows? But like, I mean, what the range on what you can get, what included in a snapshot, I think is just, it's huge, right?
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like people say snapshot, like it's like it's just a snapshot, but it's really not, right? As Zach said, it is a business, and so built into a snapshot are so many presuppositions about the best way to do something, right? Or the presuppositions of the way that things are going to be done. That really, if you just adopt a snapshot, I mean, you're really putting your faith into whoever built it. You're putting your faith in their hands, right? And so I think that people generally kind of jump straight into buying a snapshot when such a big part of actually getting to high level is customizing it to your particular business. So I'll give you an example. I recently kind of offered to build a free snapshot for the community, and I'm still working on that. And so I had asked at the time for a series of volunteers, right, to help me out. And so as a part of this onboarding process, I said, okay, can you please tell me, first of all, I need to know that you're already successful, right, in this area, and that you already have something that's working. You have a sales process and a marketing process that's actually working for you. That's the first filter. And the second thing is, I need you to kind of break down what the actual sales process is for you. And so after I've spoken to 5, 6, 7 different people about a particular niche, they all have different ways of doing it, right? And so there comes the problem of built into a snapshot is an assumption that one way of doing it is better than all the other ones, right? And even if, let's say that there is a superior way of doing it, right? But if you buy a snapshot, well, let's say that the way that you currently run your business is not the best way of doing it, and you buy a snapshot that actually is the better way of doing it, but you're not willing to change because it requires a bunch of operational shifts, right? Then that becomes useless. And so that's when I kind of had an epiphany. And that epiphany was just that, hold up, I got to tell my gimbal to stop tracking me. The epiphany is that I think that in order to properly build a snapshot that you're going to resell, you have to understand what are the different variations in terms of the business models. Okay. And what are the different, so not only what the different variations are, but also you also have to understand what things need to be customized within the snapshot so that in the onboarding process, you can account for these different variations of the business models and the different things that will need to be customized. And that can be a part of the done with you process of setup, right? Because if you do just sell the snapshot straight out, then you're just making an assumption that that they're going to want to adopt the way that you're doing business. And that's not the case. And to adopt a snapshot, to use a snapshot, has many implications in terms of the way that you run your business in terms of larger operational systems. Okay. I have
a hunch that a lot of these people that are getting into this are newer, right? They're new agency owners, new to GHL, and they're just hoping that someone has already put all of the legwork into it. And it's almost like, whatever you give me, I guess that's what I'm going to do,
I think a lot of people, it's kind of, there's a huge learning curve, okay, when it comes to adopting high level. And I think the reason is this. We've been so kind of trained to use all these different platforms that we don't think in terms of the sales process anymore. We think in terms of platforms that have certain capabilities. And so what high level allows us to do is now we can start thinking in sales processes. So there's a huge shift that just happened, right? Before we were thinking about the technical limitations because of these softwares being separated. And now we can straight up think with ease, we can easily connect all these different parts of the system because they're all part of high level. And now we have the ability to think right into think in terms of sales processes, right? And so people have one thing that's kind of disconnect is the fact that there is this huge difference. They don't know how to think about it. And so, they'll immediately go and buy a snapshot and they won't realize that you're buying a sales process. You're buying a whole thing. Now, it's actually even more than a sales process. It's just a series of business processes, just like Zach said, right? It's everything from, and you can break this down, Zach, at lead generation, acquisition, onboarding, adoption, all these different components that are now actually, you're able to do a lot of it, at least in terms of the marketing, in terms of the communications, the marketing aspect of it, within high level, right?
Yeah, man.
So
I think that's like, yeah, that's kind of the conclusion I came to as well, specifically touching on the point that you made about kind of like not knowing how to think about it. Like I've had, and you guys probably have too, but I've had so many people come to me that had just bought like a snapshot and from, from other people in the community, and like some of the snapshots that I know that they've just bought, like I know they're like pretty decent snapshots. It's not like the snapshot is bad, like the business process that was outlaid in that snapshot that a few snapshots I know a bunch of people have bought, like was a pretty good like abstraction layer for them, like a good starting point. The problem is like kind of like, I don't know, kind of like anything else in life, it's kind of like if you know how to like solve the problems, then like when the problems come, like you could solve them. But if you're just handed the solution, then like you don't really know. It's kind of like, in math class or something, it's like why do the teachers always want you to show your work? It's because like you have to show like how you got to those conclusions. And so a lot of people come to me because they basically are like, okay, so like I have this snapshot and I'm thinking about like my clients, or maybe they're just starting out and they're like, I just talked to a few clients, and it's like they're trying to reconcile this world that just got delivered to them with this world that they're like, they're trying to figure out how to make it a reality, like how do I make it a reality, like, and actually turn this thing on and make it do like start generating results and all this kind of stuff. And the thing is like, it's not like really oftentimes that plug and play, like no matter how good the snapshot is, like there's a process of like with really every single client engagement to some degree, like, and obviously all of us are trying to get it to where it's like, if you're doing SaaS or whatever, it's like you want to sort of like get it to where every client for the most part is kind of like onboarding the same way, like, like, and eventually,
for sure.
yeah. And when you get big enough, like you can kind of like, when clients come your way, you can kind of tell them like, yeah, so like this is the box that I have that you can come fit into if you want to, versus kind of saying like, I'm going to make this box fit to you, type of thing. And when you're in the beginning stages, like that's kind of what you're doing a lot of times for people, is like, let me make this box fit to you, because you're not in an authority position to be able to say like, yeah, you need to make this box like work like this. It's like, I remember back before I started helping like, agencies and stuff in high level, like when I was running my own, in the wellness space, it was like the first several wellness clients, I was like, I don't really know, like I'm just kind of like trying to figure out how your business works and like, like get better at this. But then after like several of them, I started to be like, okay, like now I can, like, now I'm seeing patterns, like now I can see like what's happening, like I can start making recommendations, like, and all this kind of stuff. And so anyway, like one of the things I've been really interested in with snapshots and like focused on is like, kind of like how to give somebody a framework on how to like think about it. And it reminded me like back, and like when I was in the tech world, it was like I would interview developers, and like there would always be whiteboard sessions, when we would interview people, and they'd have to draw code on whiteboards and whatnot. And one of the like really like one of the things that was always like developers were super freaked out about, and like reasonably so, is like if they have to do that in isolation chamber and they don't have access to the frameworks that they use every single day. Like, let's say they're a JavaScript developer, you got like Node.js, you got React, you got all these like JavaScript frameworks that really save you like kind of 80% of not the work, but they save you like kind of 80% of the mental work that you have to put in to like think about again, like how to like reach all those conclusions that you're trying to reach. And so anyway, like what do you guys think about that kind of idea? Like, do you think it's possible, like in the world of snapshots, to kind of have these mental models or frameworks that like they aren't really designed to be something that somebody just like, it kind of decoupling this idea of like really anything being ready to use 100% out of the box, and kind of like transitioning more over to an idea of like, to some degree, everything is going to need like a little bit of TLC, like when you ingest it, for
Definitely.
you, for your situation, for the businesses that you serve and their situations and their customers. So if that is the case, like, how do we even think about snapshots? Like, what's the mental models that we use to do that?
Yeah, and I think, when it comes to those frameworks, the frameworks themselves are tools. Okay. So if the framework is like, okay, there's this tripwire funnel, but then there's this, other type of funnel, there's a straight sales letter funnel, etc. They're going to be applicable in certain situations. And so it's up to the expert to be able to determine like the client situation and what their needs really are. Right now, if you're familiar with an industry, right, after you have a few conversations with people, you might be able to come to that. So if you're someone who's making snapshots, you should also probably be a marketing expert, right? So that you know how to actually apply these different things. And so the frameworks are very useful if you're building the snapshot, right?
Yeah, like some of the best snapshots probably come from like people that are also running agencies, that have like a good amount of experience in those niches they're structuring the snapshots for, which I guess is like similar in coaching. It's like you don't really want a coach to coach you on anything if they don't have any experience in what they're coaching on. It's kind of like you could know all the technical things in high level, but without like the actual experience and like who you're serving, then it's just a bunch of the technical stuff kind of put together that's probably not going to make like a ton of sense, in my personal opinion. But not that there isn't good technical best practices. I'm not trying to imply that. I'm just,
Yeah, there are, but I think it's just like, it is really the most important thing is having like the actual larger like marketing concepts applied to your particular business model. I think that's the most important thing. And then, we can figure out the technical best practices, later and stuff.
Yeah, man, like I would have no idea how to structure a snapshot on like those little cars that like your kids can drive around that are electric. And,
yeah, James was telling us about that a second ago.
Birthday parties, and like,
yeah.
And I heard of this one dude, brilliant guy. He had this idea of renting
Total
those
genius.
things out, like, and letting people use them for birthday parties and stuff. And that was the moment I realized, like, I would have no idea how to build a snapshot for that, but that's an insane idea and amazing. Yeah. So
I feel like
that's James, by the way. I was
Yeah.
just talking about.
Thanks,
in case you didn't know.
So let me clarify a couple things. Almost talk like you were talking about a la carte. Like you could come in and say, "Hey, I want my reviews. I want my support portal. I want my lead nurture. I want," almost like you could almost pick from a menu of the things that you want to bring in.
Yeah, like componentizing snapshots.
Yeah.
So, and this brings me back to what Zach was saying earlier. It's like, if you have these frameworks, so for instance, Zach has this framework, and maybe you can break it down after I'm done talking about it. But he goes through all the different components that a business typically has, from tip to stern, from lead generation all the way to, getting people to become affiliates, basically. All right. Tip to stern. Now, we know that this can pretty much be applied. That framework can pretty much be applied in literally any business, right? in terms of there's lead generation, then there's acquisition, then there's some onboarding or fulfillment process. Then after that, there's a review management process that's a part of that. And then, then there's upsells, and then potentially they turn into affiliates and all these other things, right? So that's pretty much applicable in any business. I think the bigger question is, how do we go ahead? And when it comes to a particular snapshot in a particular industry, how do we take these tools and how do we use it for them? How do we customize it so that it works best for their model? So I would not doubt that it would be possible to create a series of like mental models in terms of like even taking one step past just like that framework right there into saying, okay, there are 5 major types of businesses, right? And they either have this variation of the lead generation and acquisition, onboarding / fulfillment process, or the other one has this variation, right? And so you're creating basically systems archetypes that you're then going into. You have maybe a client, and you say maybe you have a series of questions that you ask to get to the bottom of what exactly the system archetype that applies to them is, and then you can plug it in, right? But I don't have that mental model. I'm just saying that hypothetically, I do believe that that's probably possible.
Like maybe service businesses versus brick and mortar, etc. Maybe something like that.
Yeah, it would be like, service businesses versus product-based businesses.
Yeah.
One-time service versus continuous. How different does that onboarding, fulfillment, and client success process have to look? You know what I'm saying? But now let's say that you know what you want to do. So just to pause for a second. So what I've kind of started to do is like, I've started only working with people who already have an idea of what their business needs, right? So I like to work with people who already have businesses and are looking to transition over to high level, okay? Because I realized that it's not really my job. This thing is so freaking annoying. It's not my job, and I also don't have the authority to tell them the best way of running a mattress business or whatever business, right? Yeah. So I want to apply my skills in building out.
I gotta know why you said mattress business.
Oh, I just have a client who has a mattress. That's just the first kind of mind. I'm not a mattress salesman. You know what I'm saying? That's not my profession. But if he knows what he's doing, and he does, this particular guy, I can just take his ideas and then I can run with it. You know what I'm saying? And I can put it into a framework. So instead of trying to reinvent the wheel and try to think from the ground up, that's why I kind of prefer to work with people who already have an idea. Now, let's say that you didn't want to use someone like me or James or Zach to build your thing, but you do know kind of a sales process that does work. I have a framework that I'm going to share that is going to tell you, it's a series of questions that you can ask yourself. If you answer these and you write it all out, you're going to know exactly how you need to kind of structure your snapshot. Okay. So the first thing is defining what I'll actually start with the second question so I can give context to the first. This is a weird thing. The second question is to define every single step of a process in terms of what the customer is doing and what the business is doing throughout this process. Now, there are different processes. There's a sales process, right? There's lead generation process, acquisition, onboarding, fulfillment, client success, review management, and all these different things, right? Now, if you know what you want to do, then it's just a matter of asking yourself what that process looks like, right? So you can say, all right, and actually, I would even ask yourself what it would look like optimally. Okay, maybe you don't even have to ask yourself what it would look like right now. Just optimally, what it would look like optimally. Okay, so let's say that this is a sales process, right? It starts with lead comes in through a lead form, then there's a lead nurture sequence. Right? So there's a series of messages that's being sent by the business at that point. Then there is, after they come in through the lead form, then it goes to an appointment. Right? To a calendar. Then they book an appointment. They show up to the appointment. There's a sales call and all this other stuff. Centered, let's say, two call close. Okay. So the next question that we want to ask, right, now that we have this list of all the things that the customers are doing and all the things that the actual business is doing as well, because we want to break it down into these 2 different categories, is you want to ask yourself, out of all these things that the business is doing or should be doing, like let's say that this is an optimal case scenario, this is what it should be doing, right? What can be automated? So what is literally possible to be automated? So in order to answer this question, you need to have experience with workflows. You need to understand what it's capable of doing. Okay. And if you try and you see, okay, it doesn't really look like that's possible with workflows. The next question is, can it be automated using external automation? So it really goes like this. Can it be automated with workflows? Okay. Yes or no? If no, then ask yourself if it can be automated with external automations. Right. But then there's the next question, which is, should it be automated? Right? We don't want things to be too complex. When it's too complex, it's easy to break. It's very fragile.
That reminds me of my automations that said I was going to be at this appointment. It's like, hey, are we still on? I'm like, yeah, we're still on. I'm like, okay, great. And then I'm like, oh, I had all this stuff like saying I was going to be there. And then I wasn't.
They need to be like, sorry, that was an automation.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, that's a great example of you maybe automated a little too much there.
Yes, so it's definitely possible to automate it too much, and you'll know it. So basically, there's the question of if it can be done, and then the next question is if it should be done. So how do we determine if it should be? So we need to think about what level of what kind of value is this providing to the business? If this was automated, right? How much time is this saving somebody else, right? And then the next question after we ask that is, okay, so if we were to build this, how much complexity would it be? The next question is, like, does the actual value that it provides justify the complexity in terms of a possibility of breaking, in terms of the time and resources is going to be required to set up, etc. Okay. Now, just to give kind of a little insight, my thoughts are that we should try to keep things as simple as possible, and we want to only have automations that are in the high. It's having a high value to complexity ratio. Okay, there are times where you have to do highly complex things that only provide a medium level of value, but especially when I'm first starting, if I'm talking to somebody who's first starting in high level, I'm saying focus only on what's going to provide high level. You can build out.
High value.
Only high value to a complexity ratio, and then you can build out the other things down the line. Okay. Yeah. So then now we know what is going to be automated and how it's going to be automated. The next question is, okay, so we know what's going to be manual, right? Because all the other things that aren't being automated must be manual. Next question is, how can we use automations to actually help the team members do manual processes?
Yeah.
So this is something actually I kind of started thinking about this from James. James has a video where like after an hour after an appointment or something along those lines, it sends a salesperson like a message with a series of trigger links. Did they show? Did they not show? Right? And then they just click that message. I'm like, that's so brilliant, because people, and when I say people, I'm talking about me. When I get an appointment, I'm like the laziest person ever. So it'll be a real pain for me to go in there and actually change it to no show. And if I'm like that, I know all my sales guys will be like that, right? I'm going to encourage them to go in the CRM and stuff, but I also want to make something that's actually going to be used, right?
Yeah.
And so if I receive a text saying, "Hey, did they show up?" then all I have to do is click two things, then boom, it's done. I'm not having to go into the CRM. It's very easy.
Can I say one thing?
Yeah.
I just want to put this out there that some people have had, as far as mental models, some people have had the idea of like that the customers don't even log in, that your clients don't even log into the CRM, that the whole CRM is doing things, sending emails, getting status updates via trigger links, booking appointments. Yeah, because like, let's say a dentist, like they don't want another tool.
Or independent contractors, handyman who are on the road.
Yeah.
All these different types of people, they don't want to log into a CRM. They don't care, but they still want all the good marketing, right? And so it's just a
completely different mindset shift of, wow, how can I make this whole thing run without anybody really even logging into it?
Yes, exactly. So that's why the question of asking whether or not there are things that we can do to help facilitate the actions that are going to be needed to be done manually, right? Yeah. That's such an important point. So definitely I would write that out. Now that we know what is going to be what's going to be done automatically and manually, we have an idea of what the customer process is going to, what the sales process is going to look like. If we're talking about a sales process right now, once again, we could be talking about fulfillment. We could be talking about whatever, right? Once we know what it's going to look like, we can then ask ourselves two questions. And before I tell you the question is, I want to give some context as to what a pipeline is. So a pipeline in high level, it's a Kanban board. Now, what's the point of a Kanban board? It's to symbolize where a particular object or customer is in a process. And it's supposed to be helpful to the actual team members. It's just supposed to help the team members facilitate their jobs, right? So we don't have to.
Let me say something on this real quick.
I think he disagrees with me actually.
No. I totally agree. I just the whole Kanban thing, like it originates. Its origin is I think Toyota was like one of the first companies to like pioneer this, but it's called a pull-based system, like, and it used to just be, and in fact, I've worked with teams where we've done this before, where it was like, okay, like there was literally such a high amount of complexity that we were like, we needed to actually collapse technology down and go all the way back to like basics and basically take sticky notes, hang them on a wall, and like put them in lanes. And like, so the whole idea with a pull-based system is you go and you pull the one off the very top of a lane, and then you move it to the next lane, and like so then everything that gets added on the next lane goes one tier down. And so it's essentially called stack ranking priority. And so like when you look at lists like that, like the ones on the top they have the highest rank, because of the way that you're moving those tickets across. So like everything that's happening now in digital is just like a remanifestation of like that type of system, which is actually quite simple. So anyway, I just wanted to add that context, as you're talking about pipelines. I care really deeply about pipelines. So
we're also obsessed with pipelines over here.
Are you saying that, okay, there's obviously the columns, right? Are you saying that there's also significance in the rows? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Well, the system and high level will by default move things in that order that I just mentioned, because that's like a typical Kanban style order. But like if you were to be a purist about Kanban in that way, then yes, like in a lane, the ones on the top are the highest priority items to be addressed first, and then you move down sequentially. So
maybe ordering by lead value or something like that potentially.
Well, their default order in like a stack rank like that is just purely time based. It's based on when it entered the stack. So certain Kanban systems will allow you to use like a sub kind of mechanism to restack them, but a lot of times when you do that, like some systems will even make you choose, like you can either do that or you can stack rank them, and it won't let you do both. Meaning if you want to be able to click and drag them around, you can't use like another filtering mechanism, because it kind of breaks like the whole idea of Kanban if you start doing that. But then you have other systems, like I use Airtable, for example, and I can do anything I want in Airtable. Like if I want to have a Kanban list and then like sort them like 3 times after that, like in their lists, then great, I could do that. But you're not supposed to. So
it's so funny. I was just, over the summer, I got my Lean Six Sigma green belt, and my exam was like 40 pages long. Once I was done with it, dude, I had to do so much, but I was learning all about these Kanban systems and the push and pull systems and all these different things when it comes to kind of lean methodologies. So a lot of it's giving you a lot of context for me in terms of, the best ways to kind of configure operations, and then further kind of how to structure, really good high level accounts. And so what I was saying a second ago was just that the pipelines themselves are just a Kanban board, right? The purpose is to help team members facilitate different processes. So that takes us to the first question that we need to ask ourselves in order to establish a pipeline. And that is how important this stage is relative to manual process that needs to be done at this particular point when a customer reaches this particular point in the process, right? So it needs to be relevant. And then the second question is whether or not this step of the sales process is significant. So, right, let me just take a step back. We're taking up all the steps of this particular process. I need to just turn off this freaking thing, the gimbal motion on my webcam. We are taking all the steps of the processes and we're asking which steps in this whole thing are important, right, to a manual process for our team members to know. And then the second thing is asking whether or not it's significant. And so I'll give you an example of what significance is. And I did this in a previous video at a point. But significance, like let's say that there's 3 consecutive lead stages or steps in the particular process. Okay. There's appointment booked, there's appointment showed, and then there is follow-up. Okay. Now, oh my freaking goodness, this is pissing me off. Let's say that within like, I don't know, 10 minutes of the appointment being showed, it's automatically being moved to either a follow-up or there's a contract that's being sent or they're being disqualified, right? So they're only going to be in the appointment showed lead stage for just like 30 minutes or so before they're moved to where they need to go. So that's not a significant step in the process for them to be showed unless you have something happening, right? If maybe you're doing certain messaging or you're waiting on certain feedback at that space, then, you can do that, right? And that is the case sometimes when it comes to, if you're a gym owner, after someone shows up to, a training, you want to get their feedback on how the training went before doing anything else, right? But if you're doing a sales call, pretty much it goes straight from the appointment showed in the actual process to them either being a follow-up, a contract sent, or they're disqualified. Okay. So that's where we narrow it down by the things that are important in terms of the sales process. Then we ask ourselves what's significant. So anything that is.
Let me layer on something onto this when you're done. With just an expansion of what you're saying.
Yeah. So if something is if a step is transient, then it's not significant. Okay. So I'm not including it in the pipeline. All right, you can go on, Zach.
No, yeah. So my flow looks like really so far with pretty much everything that you've said looks really similar to yours. And some of the mental models are just, there's like a slight pivot. And on like kind of what you're saying now. So like, as you guys know, but I have like inside of our framework, we essentially kind of have like a fixed number of pipelines that we map against for like the whole customer journey. So it's essentially like once we have all those activities that you're talking about, Sam, and we have like a full map of like, okay, so like what is the business process relative to like their customer's journey, then we map it across those 6 pipelines. But when we get inside of those pipelines and we're trying to decide like, okay, so like what stages need to be created, like sort of like the model that I've been using for that is like, to me, there's essentially like two reasons why like a stage is going to exist, and it's like kind of binary. It's like one of those 2 things, and that's either for like the sake of awareness, meaning there's nothing that they need to do, there's nothing that the business needs to do, no action that they need to take. It's simply just for their awareness as an account of like where somebody is in the journey. Now like they may decide like what the reason why they might want to have that awareness is because like when somebody has awareness, they're kind of like empowered at that point to go outside of the system if they want to. Like you'll get some like really agile sales teams that are like, they get kind of freaked out by like having to follow like a really rigid sales process because they're kind of like lone rangers, and like that's kind of how they do their thing, is they just basically like free willy it, and like do whatever they want. And so it's kind of like you want them to be in a system, but you also want them to like have some level of awareness of like where they're at in the system in case they decide that they want to like interject, or just simply for reporting and data purposes, like for the business. But the second one that is essentially like if they're in a stage because there's an action that either the customer needs to take or the business needs to take. And so it's like more action oriented, like in that regard. And so in the context of like one of those 2 things, like if one of those 2 things is justified essentially, and we're like debating, okay, does it need a pipeline stage? Like the model kind of like off of what you were talking about, Sam, like you used importance versus significance, and we more do like an Eisenhower matrix style thing, which is importance relative to urgency. And so it's essentially kind of like the same thing as what you're talking about as far as outcome is concerned, which is like, if it's going to be a transient thing, like they're going to just move to another stage on a time box, like in 30 minutes or something, then there's no urgency for the business to see that. It's just basically like, whatever. Now, like if somebody like cancels their service appointment that they had scheduled, that they put like a deposit down on, like that's more of an urgent thing that the business needs to see, because now we're not deploying a team out to the location at that present appointment time box. Like now we need to like push for a reschedule.
That's a great idea.
Like all that type of stuff. It's more of an urgent thing. Now there's going to be some things like just like the Eisenhower matrix preaches that have a high level of urgency, but they're not really that important actually. And actually cancellation could fall in that box as well, because if you have an automated cancellation nurture sequence, it's like it's important to get those people rescheduled, but it's still not urgent for the business because the system is actually going to take care of like re-nurturing them back to another appointment anyway. But like somebody like in the groupies system, as an example, we have kind of like a survey that goes out before soliciting for a review that it's like an informal gating of sorts. And it's basically like, hey, how was your experience, with the last service? Like, was it good? Was it bad? Like kind of like an NPS type thing. And then, like in the event that it was good, we're like, well, hey, we'd love for you to leave us a review, type of thing. And we can't obviously stop people that are pissed, from leaving reviews, but we can kind of like filter a little bit of them out. But if somebody replies back and they said, actually, like I had a terrible experience, like you guys came out, you tried to, do this and that on my property and you broke a bunch of stuff and whatever, like, now that's an example of something that, was important before, but not urgent. But now the urgency just significantly increased because these people are really mad at us and they're on the verge of going to leave a review, type of thing. So that would be something that the business would want to handle. And that would be like a justification for a pipeline stage is how we kind of look at it. So it's essentially kind of like what you're saying, just a little bit of a different orientation. But
no, I think that's such a great idea. I think that adding the element of urgency as a dimension to think about the step of the process or like the particular outcome is a fantastic idea. And I'm going to rewatch this podcast for sure. So I could go through, parse through all that, because that's super interesting. That's a really good idea.
We should do like a whole sub thing at some point on just the Eisenhower matrix, because I got really into Eisenhower for a little bit, like just kind of like
such a great president, you guys.
Yeah, and he was so productive.
I didn't know you were talking about. I actually know that from the Stephen Covey from the 7 Habits book. It seems like it's the same thing.
Yeah, a bunch of people have like used his model and like basically, kind of repurposed it.
The quadrants, the time management quadrants. And then Sam, when you were talking, I was starting to see like a flow chart, in my mind, but maybe that's something you could, put together is that flow chart for people.
And so that flow chart was the bane of my existence, because I was trying to think, how do I break down this flow chart? And I'll tell you about it. Let me continue to go over the different questions you need to ask, because I want to make sure that I'm thorough here, so that people who are at least building out their own Go High levels are really clear on what they need to do, right? And then we could tie this back into the snapshot. But anyway, into creating snapshots for other people. You also need to ask, so once you, actually maybe it is relevant that I go over this diagram right now, because I think it's going to answer a lot, okay? And it's going to allow me to in an easier way, kind of go about asking these other questions. So what I usually do, it took me a while to figure out exactly how I need to go about creating these diagrams. It's basically a swim lane diagram where there are 3 lanes. On the top is what the customer does. In the middle is what automations do. Mm-hmm. And at the bottom is what manual actions do, or what our team members are manually having to do. Okay. Now the different objects in the workflow diagram, they represent surveys or forms or calendars or different assets that they're interacting with. Okay. At the level of and also when it comes to like if it's a survey or form, there's a section that they can click that shows what information is being actually captured in this particular form. Okay, maybe
you're talking about 3 horizontal swim lanes, right? Like stacked
Yes.
on top of each other.
Yes.
So like you'd have the parent lane at the top, which is like customer journey, and then I'm assuming like one of the two, like either like
So all of this is a customer journey. It's just
right,
a matter of what
which
parts are
one it gets
segmented
mapped to.
into what the customer is actually doing, what the business is, and then the 2 bottom sections are what the business is doing, broken down into manual and automatic.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then
a system sequence diagram from computer science.
Yeah, buddy.
so let me see. Let's see if that is kind of what I'm thinking.
That's what it makes me think of. Bad memories.
So that's the thing. I think that it needs to be more intuitive than some of these like more abstract diagrams.
Uh-huh.
It has to be clearer. And because I actually recommend, especially when you're building out a snapshot to resell, you need to have a diagram that goes along with it and a video that explains the diagram. Now, there's a real problem. I'll go back into the details of how to make it. But there was a real problem I was encountering because I was trying to think, how can I make this simple enough for people to understand? Right? Because a lot of people, they look at diagrams, they're like, dude, another freaking diagram? Like, I do not want to look at a diagram right now. Like, just tell me how it works, right? But, and because I was sensitive to that, I wanted to try to create something that was maybe only an approximation. It was simpler, right? It was simplifying things, but the result would be that it was only an approximation, right?
Yeah.
And so the more simple that you make something look and the more simple that you portray something, the less true it actually is. And so I made the decision that I wanted to have a diagram that said everything, and then just have a video that breaks down everything, and they can go look at it at their own pace, because it's a lot of information to take in for sure, right? And so that's the way that I'm kind of doing now. As before, right? Customer, automated actions, and the manual actions. In the automated actions, in that swim lane, there will be boxes. Those boxes will say, like for instance, the boxes will symbolize a workflow. And then in that workflow, I go through all the different conditions and all the different things that are happening. So it can be a pretty large diagram, but it's thorough, right? And it goes through the entire process from left to right, what's happening from the very beginning all the way to the end. Now, that's where you could also add in additional categories, right? You could have brackets that show, hey, this is the lead generation process. This is the acquisitions process, and so on and so forth.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
And then you could also, for instance, you could also indicate when something is connecting to an outside system as well. So if you have a webhook that's going somewhere and that's doing something in some other place, you can set it up, maybe there's a 4th row for external automations, right? So maybe it goes like, I don't know, something along the lines of customer actions, workflow automated actions, external automated actions, and then manual, right? Now, before you can actually even get to that, right, we have to go through and outline the entire process just step by step. So you write out the whole thing, and then you ask the questions, then you're able to determine what needs to be done for all 4 of those categories. Okay. But if you do it like that, you can actually completely map out the entire thing. And so that's where it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, which is people need to stop thinking in fragmented systems and softwares in terms of their limited capabilities. And they need to start thinking in terms of a larger system that's happening. And they need to start thinking in sales processes. And so this is a way that's a really great way of actually visualizing it. And so once you have all this written out, right? If you've created this diagram, maybe you haven't created it yet, you're going to notice that at different points, hey, well, this person's filling this form, or we have to collect this information from the customer on a call. Maybe even before you define the fact that there's a form, you just say that we somehow retrieve this piece of information, this piece of information, this piece of information. Then those pieces of information that you're collecting are going to be the foundation of what your custom fields are, right? If they are not contained within, the standard, like first name, last name, organization name, phone number, email, right? Then now we know kind of what needs to be done in terms of custom fields, right? Mm-hmm. And then also, as we're mapping out this process, we're seeing, all right, at this point, we need to be collecting the information. We need to be collecting this information at this point in particular. Okay, so maybe we put a form here. How can we create a form? And so it kind of all feedbacks into one another, but it's a very creative process. And so, but as you learn high level more and more, you're going to be able to kind of more intuitively do this. But you start out by following these directions. Now, one thing that needs to be considered is that after you fill out, after you create the pipeline, basically, so you could use the whole the Eisenhower's matrix thing, the significance, the importance, whatever. The next question is, going back to the automations that we just made in the manual processes, at what points do we need to be, at what points in these different processes, either automated or manual, do we need to be putting them into a certain lead stage of the pipeline? And then, so we need to go back and rework the logic so that that's added as well. But before we do that, we need to, before we initially create the workflows and define everything in terms of manual and automated, sorry, I just totally misspoke. It's important that we define what's manual, what's automated before we create the pipeline. So we have to go back and then plug the pipeline back into the workflows. Okay, does that make sense? Because we don't know what the pipeline even looks like until we've divided it up already into automated versus manual. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm tracking with you, man.
Cool.
I'm very visual. If you guys have seen any of my stuff, I'm always screen sharing. Like I've been pictures, like I'm so visual, and that would definitely help at some point. But yeah.
In a follow-up call, I'll have to actually bring up a diagram. So this whole thing that I was doing in terms of like the customer journey, the manual actions, the automated, right? This is actually brand new. So
okay,
like it was such a thing, like it was such a hard, like I was really trying to think, like, how do I diagram this thing? Because I've seen what other people have done, and I've my buddy, my assistant, he's worked on some pretty gnarly snapshots before, and he shows me this diagram, and it looks like a freaking circuit board for real. Okay, and I'm like, no, there has to be a better way, and so. No, we can't go there. Okay, that's where people just say, "All right, I'm just done closing. I'm closing my business." Right? They see a circuit board, and they're like, "All right, I'm good." Right? And so what I had realized, what he was doing, and what a lot of other people do, is they kind of, the way that they structure the diagrams, actually, they kind of confuse the point, like the point of why the diagram even exists in the first place. So, for instance. It'll be tracking the actions of the customer throughout the entire process, or the actions that are happening to the customer throughout the entire process. But then they'll have like a symbol for the entire pipeline, and then they'll point an arrow there, right? When in fact, it should just be another action in the workflow that says move to this stage of the pipeline. However we decide to categorize the workflow diagrams needs to be consistent all the way through. If that makes sense. That's like a little abstract. Let me try to think of an example. I was just working with my assistant about this. So if you're trying to describe actions, then don't put assets as the symbols. You know what I'm saying? Like abstractly, without any other information. It needs to be, all the information that's in the workflow diagram needs to be related back to an action that's occurring, right? Otherwise, the information that you're explaining with, or that you're illustrating with the diagram, is incoherent because it has two different purposes. Does that make sense at all? It's like a little bit of an abstract idea to try to like communicate.
Yeah.
Hope I'm not blabbering.
Yeah, no, man. I mean, I think that when I've talked about pipelines in various videos in the past and everything, like, just to kind of like recenter it on this, like, for me, like I always tell people, like the entire point of a pipeline is for an opportunity on that pipeline to be able to be resolved to one of the opportunity statuses in the pipeline, which means like somebody is either going to be won in that pipeline, they're going to be lost in that pipeline, or they're going to be abandoned in that pipeline. And so, like all of the pipeline stages are like they're supposed to essentially, in my mind, be, like essentially kind of like mile markers, like on your destination. That's basically like, we're 20 miles out, we're 50 miles out, like in terms of like where they are to resolving themselves as one. Now, like if somewhere like along the journey of like on their way to, Disney World, like they get lost, or they just decide that there's too much like chaos going on in the car, and they're gonna have to bail out on this trip, then like they can resolve as abandoned. But all that to say, like to your point, Sam, like I've seen a bunch of diagrams where like yeah, like people are diagramming like all of the potential like user paths, and like all of the parts of the system that are going to interact with that, and or like with the user to get there. And it's like there's like threads going here and there, and it's like if they do this, then they're going to go back way over here, and like all this kind of stuff. And that's, I think, for at least in my opinion, like for my purposes, like that type of documentation isn't really that helpful, and it's like it's actually too detailed. Like the most, like the information that like I always need is like, okay, so like at one point in time, like is somebody going to be one, abandoned or lost, and is a human responsible for them making it to that status, or is it the system that's ultimately going to move them that status? And if the system does it, is it because like the user took another like action somewhere else in the system? For example, like in our acquisition pipeline, it's very common, for like kind of the metric for like one in that pipeline to be that somebody scheduled an appointment in the conversion pipeline. So it's like the second appointment comes through on the conversion calendar, like somebody is auto resolved in the acquisition system, because like that the acquisition system served its purpose, and now that person is like over in the conversion system, and now they have a chance of closing them. So anyway, like that's really, I like the swim lane thing quite a bit, Sam. Like that would be an interesting way to restructure some of my documentation, because like right now, we're just using like standard flow charting language. Like if you're flow charting in Lucidchart or something, like you'll have a certain shape object that's for like manual actions. You'll have another shape object that's for like a predefined process. You have like a diamond always represents like a decision tree. And so there's things like that, where we document out like that, but it's still too complicated for like the common person to get. And like I've had so many people say like, oh, I didn't even know like different shapes meant different things, even though like when we do Loom videos and stuff, like that's all explained and everything. But like,
well, that's the thing. It's like this video. So that kind of goes back to the purpose of creating these whole diagrams in the first place. This is their business now. Okay, whatever we're building is the way they're going to run their business, and they need to have that information. Now, the question is, who exactly in their team needs to see it? Maybe it's not the business owner because they don't really care, right? This is an operational thing, and it is definitely important for someone in operations to know the logic. So it's like I have the diagram, but I also have a video of me going through the diagram, walking through everything. And this is really meant for operations, right? Remember that a snapshot is just a business. And so it's thorough, and it needs to be documented as thoroughly as we would document our own operation that if it was completely outside of high level. You know what I'm saying? So I think it's just about why we're doing it. We're handing them a business. It's important for them to know. And even if it is maybe just them, right?
And you can have different levels of assets. Like that's what we've done, is like the visual demonstration is like higher level, but then there's a Google Doc where it's basically just like all of the logic, the actual logic that is going to be used like in the system has to be documented somewhere. It's like we're doing it anyway so that we don't F up, but and so like if they want to see that, great, like if there's somebody that like needs to look at that, type of thing, which I think is like that way of doing it's been, I think, good because it's kind of like, hey, here's this doc for you if you're this type of person, and if you really like to get into the weeds, like there's this other thing for you where you can get lost for a few days if you want, you know.
Well, you know what, and that's exact. So I break down whenever I'm creating documentation for a client. There is the way that I'm planning to do it is I have like this diagram that goes over everything. It's the high level diagram. And then there's a second component or second category of like tutorial videos that are actually role training. So while I'm going through this process, I'm working with them, I'm defining, you know, and this goes back to like when we ask ourselves what team members need to be doing actions manually, I'm categorizing those into roles. And then from there, I can create role-based trainings. So then if there's a salesperson in this role, right? Or if there's a customer success, what's happening, right? And then at that's the lower level stuff where it's just a matter of, this is what you're doing. This is all you need to know really about how this whole thing works. You know what I'm saying? And if you need to know more, you can watch the high level overview that goes over everything, right? But the problem, and I think the idea of having different versions that are more or less simple is maybe a good idea. But then the problem that I ran into is like, if I try to the more you try to simplify it, the more that it's not true. The more that there's detail that's missing that is relevant. So like, for instance, there's two decisions, there's two abilities. You can have something. So I'll give you an example of when it starts to break down. Okay. And this is something I was just was thinking about this because I was just figuring out how to diagram it. Let's say that they book an appointment, and that when they book an appointment, it also there's a form that's on the page on the calendar page right after it. It's associated with the calendar, and so information is also saved in their custom fields, right? Now, if I want to, the fact that what's actually happening is that it's going into the custom fields, right? Now, let's say that down the line, let's say in the next step, those custom fields are referenced in a series of conditions in a workflow, in an automated workflow. Okay. Well, if I wanted to simplify it, I could just say that it goes straight from the appointment to this workflow. And that works if the workflow is triggered immediately after the appointment occurs, right? That is basically still the truth if it happens right after. But let's say that workflow is triggered a week after the appointment is actually booked, right? And there's a bunch of stuff that's happening in between now when the appointment is booked and then it pulls those custom fields into this workflow diagram to throw it through a series of conditions. Now, if I try to draw it directly from the appointment booked icon to this workflow to indicate that the information's coming straight from the appointment to this workflow, then it's actually not true, right? It's waiting in the custom fields for a long time, for a week in this particular instance, before it's being referenced when this workflow is being triggered by an unrelated event. So that's just the detail that's lost when we try to simplify things with diagrams. You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that does make sense. Like, I think one thing that might help is like kind of like a modular sort of approach is like, you know, in the sense that it's kind of like for example, like when I diagram, like on the highest level, like the initial like diagram that they get of like kind of like their customer's journey like through the system will be like across pipelines, pipeline stages, and like will call out whether it's like the system or the business or the customer that's like responsible for like that aspect of the movement. And that's like enough for them to kind of visualize like, okay, so like it gets to this part of the equation and the system is responsible for like basically taking care of this until decision tree, one of these two things happens, like until the user does this or the business decides to do this.
Yeah.
And so we haven't, it's not that we're it's not as much that details being left out of that. Like everything in that is true. It's just that like when we say something like, okay, the system is responsible for doing this, like there's a lot under the hood. Well, what all is the system doing to be responsible for doing that? Well, the system is doing a lot of things, like some like across all kinds of different things, type of thing. And
Well,
so that's where that
so-
has to still be documented. And it's
Yes.
like we have to go through like this is everything the system's doing. And in that layer, no detail gets left out because it's kind of like all of that, like we were talking about the math equation. It's like that's all of the show work stuff right there that happens like for us to make that higher level map that we just did like a reality. Like that map isn't a reality unless all that logic exists like underneath.
Well, the problem in my mind, because I was thinking about doing that, like hiding the detail in a block, in a single block that represents the workflow, then maybe they click that and then it takes them to a more detailed elaboration of what exactly is happening at that in that particular workflow. The problem that I had thought of is just like, okay, let's say that there are like 3 different possible outcomes of this workflow based off of conditions, and they all actually alter where the customer is in the pipeline, or they send different messaging, right? And then let's say that on the next tier up, like the original diagram that just shows the pipeline or whatever, maybe shows what's happening with the customer. How are we incorporating the fact that there were 3 different messages sent at this point into this diagram to explain that, and that all the different outcomes from there? And so it's like you start missing information, and that's where I'm like, whoa, I'm like, what's the best way to do it? And that's why I think that having the entire customer like process like mapped out the way that I had it, because it has all the information, right? And it's very clear in terms of how it's formatted. Every single thing that's happening throughout the process is documented. Now, I do believe it probably would be a good idea to make it modular and break it down into pipelines, but that's where maybe like we create brackets, say, hey, this is for lead generation, this one's for acquisition, this one's for this one's for this, all the way down, right? And then maybe we can break those into there could be a master one that we could take the individual parts and make the workflow diagrams out of that. You know what I'm saying?
As well, dude. The whole modular conversation is like I bet the 3 of us could easily add like an hour on to this video just talking about that, because that there's so many things, so many considerations to making like a snapshot like modular, all the way from the documentation of the snapshot to the pipelines to like the niche to even like sort of sub niches and like different business structures in those niches and all that. But it would be a really interesting conversation, because I think there's probably a lot of different ways also to achieve like modularity, like a lot of sort of paths that lead to the same river.
When you say modularity, are you talking about breaking workflows down or whatever so that they're reusable at different points in the process, like modularity with code? Or what do you mean when you say modular?
Are you familiar with user stories?
No.
At all? I was just asking because it's like it's in that same camp of like lean, lean and agile like operations. Yeah, man. It's in the development world, like they're used, if you're an agile shop, like they're used essentially to structure units of work. And so the idea like behind a user story is like every single story starts out with like a statement, and the statement is, as a user, I would like to do something so that I can do something. So normally you call out the user, like you say, as a customer of a pressure washing company, like I would like to, and then whatever they would like to do, but then you always have to describe why they would like to do it. And then there's like some extra kind of things that people add on to user stories as like an expansion of kind of the original framework, like acceptance criteria and things like that for testing purposes and stuff like that. But one of the sort of like main ideas with the user story, like to whatever degree possible, is you want like every user story to be structured such that it's not like interdependent on another user story. So like every like unit of customer value can kind of like stand on its own. And so the whole idea like that I have, and then what I've been pushing for months now with like all the IP that we're building in around snapshots is essentially that they're supposed to kind of be like Legos, where you can take one piece out, put another piece in, take one piece out, put another piece in. The problem is like, whenever you're building like components to be modular like that, they also have to be scalable. And so you kind of run into an issue where, to some degree, modularity, when you stack too many things on top of each other, it's kind of like with Legos, you probably wouldn't want to build your house out of Legos. You want to use steel beams because they're stronger than just a bunch of Legos stacked on top of each other, type of thing. The same idea kind of applies when you start to get into like layering a lot of things together. But there is a lot of cases where you do want to, be able to pull something out, put something in, and all that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, anyway, so we're structuring, so like the idea, what we're moving towards is like kind of having a master snapshot that has all of our components. And so then like when we deploy snapshots down to other sub accounts or to lower levels, like we have a master branch where we can pull like whatever module we want from it. And that's like when all the workflows come over, when the pipelines come over, like all the mapping between pipelines, custom fields, workflows, all that kind of stuff is already done. And it can live on its own in a system where there's a bunch of other stuff already kind of happening, and not compromise the existing system or be compromised by the existing system.
That's a great idea.
It's hard to do though, so it's like
you want to take a second and talk about your model for like the different stages of the sales process or the customer journey really fast, just to provide context for anyone who's watching for all the things that I've been referencing this entire time.
Yeah, man. Yeah, sure. Like, so there's I mean, anybody could go like just Google like a 10-stage hourglass like customer journey, and you'll get like a bunch of different pictures that pop up on Google. Like if people have been in marketing, they've probably seen it like a zillion times. Like you have the funnel on top, and then you flip the funnel over and you put it on the bottom, and essentially purchase is in the very middle. So like everything above purchase on the top side of the funnel is like all of the activities that a lead goes through to become a customer. And then in the middle, they cross the customer threshold and they go down in the bottom side of the funnel where it expands out again at the bottom. And now they're in their like customer journey of ascension. And so like the whole idea, like for every business, is like, we want to acquire new leads. We want to turn those leads into customers. When they become customers, we want them to have an awesome experience, and we want to be able to quantify what that experience is to some degree. And we want to like explore whether or not they're interested in becoming raving fans of ours. Like, do they want to talk about us on the streets? Do they want to spread the news? Do they want to buy other things from us? Like, how much can we increase our cart value? Or like LTV from them, so that's
why does it start out big and then go small and then go big again? What's the reasoning behind that?
Was it just to indicate that fulfillment is a bottleneck, and that like the actual throughput of people who are being serviced at any given time for fulfillment is like small, whereas like as it goes down like into groupie section or whatever, into the groupie section and the flywheels and stuff, it actually there's a larger repository of clients at any given time.
So
I think one of the things that confuses people about that is like it's typically looked at in the lens like that hourglass, or well, most people look at top side funnels in the lens of like with the lens of number of people. Yeah. So it's kind of like lots of people come in the top, fewer people come through the middle. Which
I definitely get that one. that one.
And that's
leads,
the lens,
and then customers and purchases.
Yeah.
Why does it go the other way?
Right. That's what I'm saying. So if you look at it with a different lens, like, so put the revenue lens on. So it's like on the top side of the funnel, you have to spend a lot of resources, time, and or money to get like that number of people through the top, and it goes down towards the middle, and then they convert, and there's a much lower obviously conversion than like all the people that you put through the top. That cost you a lot of money. So the reason why it expands down at the bottom is because as LTV increases, like they're doing referrals, they're leaving reviews, more people are coming in, they're buying other things from you. The idea is that revenue expands like the deeper down that they go. So costs you a lot on the top, fewer people get through. Those few people that do go from the middle down to the bottom become very valuable to you, type of thing. So it's more of a revenue lens than like number of people lens. If that makes any sense. But so like in our context, like we like if you're like a power agency, you know, like you might get really into like every single one of those 10 stages, like in one of those hourglasses. But it's kind of a lot, you know, to like figure out. Like
it takes years, dude, to build all that out. I mean, there's a lot of resources and a lot of different things that are incorporated, including upsells, you know, and all this other stuff that, you know, it takes time to actually build that all out. So, but if you do have it, then it's like, okay, well, let's just plug it straight in, and, you know, let's start talking about those processes as well and map them out, you know, make
like an example is like on the first 3 stages are like interest, consideration, and intent of one of those hourglasses. And so it's like a lot of people are like, okay, so like what's the difference between interest, consideration, and intent? Like, and so if you were to think about that, like mapping that across high level, like it gets a little bit too granular. Like for most of the people that are using high level, not like, I'm not talking about the agencies, but I'm talking about like all of their customers that are trying to come in, like all the end businesses. And so what we did is we essentially distilled like the 10 down into 6 pipelines. And so the pipelines are acquisition, that's number 1. Number 2 is conversion. Number 3 is onboarding. Number 4 is value delivery. Number 5 is one that we call groupies, and number 6 is one that we call flywheel. So essentially, like no matter what niche we're working on, like when we're going through that whole like mapping process and discovery process that Sam was talking about, like we're basically taking like all their business activities and we're like saying, okay, so like which ones can we sort of attribute to like the acquisition system? Which ones can we contribute to the conversion system? Like which ones are onboarding related? Which ones are value delivery related? One of the things that's been useful to us about like that framework is like once we have like all the mapping in place and we've done that discovery, just having like the systems standing as kind of like empty containers, like allows us to look at the systems and say like, wow, like, okay, so they're really acquisition heavy, but they're really, you know, low on like having,
you can, you know, put the 20% of the work in to get 80% more results for them. Like, let's say that they have no review management, or they have absolutely no like upsells or anything. You know, they're really lacking in customer success or something, right? You're going to be able to see that because as you're mapping it out, you're going to see, okay, this is where they're actually currently really dropping the ball. This is how I can come in as a marketing expert, as the person who's building this out for them, and actually bring a whole lot of value to their business. So I think that's just great.
Yeah, it allows you to, before you even get started, like see where there's just a massive lack and just anything happening in one of those zones, like any activity at all potentially, you know. And then furthermore, I mean, so that's kind of like the first you'll see those first red flags pop up, or opportunity zones that, you know, before you even get started. But then like when you have those 6 systems in place afterwards too, like even from a high level perspective, so like if you're going to lean on high level data, like as far as dashboards are concerned and all that kind of stuff, to get sort of like top line metrics on like take like the funnel distribution and the stages distribution on the dashboard, like those are, you know, high level reporting. Like when you carry it outside a high level to like Google Analytics or Google Data Studio or something, obviously like with attribution events and stuff, you can get really complex. But if you're talking about like out of the box, kind of just like top line numbers, which is what most businesses are going to be looking at, you know, like they want to see like how many people like am I trying to acquire right now versus like how many people are going through the conversion process. And like when they're in the conversion system, like you could easily look at stages distribution and see like where bottlenecks live, just by looking at the percentages like on the funnel side that are flowing the different stages, or the percentages number of people that are stuck in one stage, on any given pipeline. And so it kind of like provides like basically a consistent layer of reporting like across like any account that we touch, which is nice. And a kind of consistent way of like looking at all of the activities, and like which system they belong to. But most importantly, like, typically like the opportunity statuses in each pipeline, like we're pushing for the same types of metrics, like to get somebody one in each pipeline. The interesting thing is like in the first three pipelines, acquisition, conversion, and onboarding, normally an opportunity is like ascending through those and they only live in one of those pipelines at a time. But like as we've deployed this with a lot of different clients now, like the remaining three systems after the conversion, so value delivery, groupies, and flywheel, like it's possible that one opportunity could live in all three of those pipelines at one time. It just depends on how the business is like trying to order things, but typically they're going through some kind of value delivery process while simultaneously in parallel trying to solicit for reviews, while simultaneously in parallel trying to like cross promote for other like product or service verticals that they have,
Makes sense.
And so, but those are three separate buckets of activities. Like how successful is cross promotion relative to review solicitation? Like it's hard unless they're decoupled to kind of like track, like, well, were we able to get a review from them, or like were we able to sell them on something else, type of thing. So anyway, so that's why we why we divided up.
Yeah, but I want to like just say something for if anyone here has made it this far and you're brand new to high level. Okay. I just want to make it totally clear that you don't need to have a ridiculous, if you're just getting started right now and you're just trying to figure out, you're going to build it yourself, you don't need to have the most absurdly complex thing. It doesn't need to be super thorough up front, right? The biggest thing when you're first getting started is finding the 20% of the functionality that's going to deliver 80% of the results, right? And so at the end of the day, like if you're just now getting started, the biggest thing would be, okay, let's get you started with the sales pipeline, right? And let's do all the things I walked through just for that, right? And then over time, as you get more comfortable, you can build more stuff. But also, as you become more familiar with the actual capabilities of high level, your whole understanding of what you should do and when it comes to marketing or what you can do is going to be totally different. So you're not going to have all the ideas. Yeah, see, I'm not having to
up and up.
Anything. I'm not having to stop the camera from moving around right now because I actually I turned off the gesture, like
the tracking.
Yeah,
dude.
So it was like follow me around, see my bed or whatever.
I was doing that to say like up with your high level knowledge, but that was funny earlier with the tracking.
Oh yeah. But dude, come on, like 5 times right now.
I agree with you, man. Like done is better than perfect, and like.
Oh, dude, absolutely.
When a lot of times when we like go through these 6 systems of people and like there's kind of discussion about all the things that they could potentially do if they wanted to, like in the midst of any kind of overwhelm, like I just tell people like if you're doing nothing in these systems right now, like doing something is better than doing nothing. And so it doesn't even matter what you're doing. It's just, I mean, it does matter what you're doing, but it's just, to
go from 0 to 1 is huge.
Yeah, like people really, I'll give you one example. Like people get really tripped up about like nurture cadences, right? And there's a lot of different, like that's like probably a whole separate video that we all could do is like, how do you really do nurture? But like in the context of nurture, like I tell people all the time, because we have a bunch of different nurture cadences that we could deploy for people and stuff. And like, you have copywriters out there saying like, yeah, like you changed this word and that word and this and that. And like you get, their 80% conversions out of stuff. And like, I'm not saying that stuff isn't true, but I just like, people get so stressed. I'm like, look, like, here's the bottom line. Like lead comes in, like, do you want to text all those people and say hello and like ask them if they want the thing that you just told them that you would give them? Like, you want to do that 300 times this month? Like, no. Okay. Like, send them a few messages and just act like yourself and write out a few things, and the system's going to deliver it for you. And at least the messages will go out. You'll get the conversation started. you can always pick it back up later manually. But like, especially if you're going to forget, like, you were mentioning earlier, Sam, like I'm that same way. Like, when you're running around doing a million different things, like, just having the system like send out an automated message for you that sounds like it's you is like a massive win, because you're going to forget to do that. I never remember to do that.
A freaking missed call text back, like just the built-in thing, like that's a massive win for a lot of people. You know what I'm saying? So finding, like, people get really hung up, and I know this because I work with a lot of people who are brand new to high level, and they get really hung up like trying to have everything completely perfect. And I'm like, you really just have to understand that your definition of perfect is going to change as soon as you understand the system more, because you're going to understand what you're capable of doing. And as you get started, if you get started with only 20% of the functionality, you're going to realize, hey, this would be handy and this would be handy. And through your experience, you're going to figure out what you want to do, right? And so just getting started is the biggest thing, because perfectionism, and this is the same for me, and this is so funny because it's also like this whole thing with why it took so long for us to create this podcast, is that the perfectionism is actually a perverse form of procrastination, right? We just need to get started. You know what I'm saying? And when you get started, you need to get started right now, and you just need to go, and you need to jump right in and figure it out. Yeah. Dude, so that's like the best advice, I think, for people who are just getting started, for sure.
I agree, man. James, do the awesome thing that you do, man, and which is like I just feel like you have like a lot of good thoughts over there. Like, what are you thinking about all this? Because we got into all this stuff here. Let me say this. We got into all this stuff, and I don't even know how many minutes in we are now. But to sort of reorient back to where we need to be, wherever that is, like on snapshots and kind of like all that stuff, like help reorient us, James. Like, what are you thinking here? What should we get into now, to
bring us back to the path, James?
Okay. Yeah. Let's maybe break for a commercial break for a second, and we'll come right back. Okay.
Cool.
Okay.
And we're back.
James straightened us out, guys. We're back on the straight and narrow now.
So there's been a whole lot of technobabble, okay? And the reason for that is because we're trying to kind of change the way that people think about snapshots. Right now, basically the snapshots that are being churned out are basically like ad templates that the agencies use for their clients, right? They're super generic. I mean, they work to some degree, but they're not excellent. They're not providing anybody like any mind-blowing, results, right? Because in order to do that, you kind of have to dive deep. You have to dive deep. You have to be an expert at whatever kind of actual business that you're running, and you have to kind of make it customized for your business if you want to see all the different things that you could possibly do with it, right?
Yeah, and just to real quick chime on that is like which I mentioned earlier as well, which is the ones that are out there right now that are generic. Like some of the people that have built some of these snapshots, like they've spent tons of time, like hundreds of hours into these snapshots, and so I don't want anybody hearing this to think like that some of the ones floating around in the community that a lot of people buy are bad, because they're not. Like the point is, like when Sam was saying ad templates, it's kind of like if you've been in the agency position, like, and we were talking about this while we were offline there for a second, is if you're an agency and you're running ads, like when you're running ads for clients, like you have to do it at scale. Like it has to be something that works to some degree for everybody, or else like if you don't have a scalable model, like you're not making money. And when people are making snapshots, they run into a similar problem where, like it's difficult because every business is a little different, like to go all the way 100% deep on every single one kind of breaks your model. And so the point is though, like that level of depth like is required if you're going to get to the spot where it's like a money machine. Like, and anyway, that's kind of where I was going with it, but feel free to take it.
It kind of begs the question though, like, is just churning out snapshots to sell to the general public the best way of actually monetizing the snapshot feature of high level, or monetizing high level, right? If you're a freelancer. And I don't think so. We were discussing a few different, possibilities, different things that we've seen in the community. So, you can take standard businesses. Let's say that, you have an opportunity to start a laundromat or something, right? Or someone owns a laundromat. Maybe you're partnering with them and you're getting a percentage of it. And then you're just like freaking throwing their whole operation on steroids. You know what I'm saying? Using Go High Level. Now that's a way that you can make a crazy amount of money, right? Is through actually partnering, you're hyper customizing for a particular location, and you're making real partnerships, and it's super customized to a particular person's, kind of setup. So
yeah, man, I think some of those like revenue models, like that's where like a lot of people in this space are headed, because yeah, like that extra, like, okay, let's say you buy a snapshot, right? And it's kind of like buying a box from IKEA, like there is some instructions, there's a lot of parts in there to put together and all that kind of stuff, and you could put it together. And like, I remember my wife and I bought, this like little like kitchen for our daughter, from IKEA. And it was like, it came like unpainted and everything. And it was like, we had to paint it to get it to that 100%, because it was like gonna look okay, if we didn't paint it. But when we painted it, it was like, and we put some like little subway tile and this and that and did some things. And I was like, now this thing is saucy, like now this thing is ridiculous. And so like, I do think, like acquiring some snapshots, like especially if they've been built with a framework that teaches you how to like discern where like some of those logic triggers need to be, where you need to change and bend it to make it like work for you. Like in that kind of environment, like they can help save you like some time, but at the end of the day, like if you're willing to carry it like the extra 20% or 30% to the finish line and like past the finish line, that's where the serious money is. Like that's where all the revenue is, no matter what the revenue model is. That's what's required if you want to make the serious dough.
I'm not sure if I already said this already, but the fact that there's so much more money to be made doing hyper customizations, right, and actually owning the business, means that all the actually really super awesome snapshots and awesome high level builds aren't being really shared, because they're being used for themselves.
Yeah.
So
and that's counter, like it's almost like that idea is like kind of offensive to the mind of a marketer, because you're wiring yourself like for scale, and you're wiring yourself like against customization and more towards as many things being automated as you can. Like the deeper that you get into all this, especially when you're working with a marketing automation platform. So to like think that, okay, like the best way to get the most output out of this is hyper customization is like kind of offensive to your mind, like
well, that's where, what if I had 5 key partnerships with people and I was making $250,000 a year from each one of them, instead of trying to churn out, a high volume of customers doing, just selling snapshots that I've built. I'd probably opt to do the first one, right? Because I'm doing less and still making more, right? Maybe there's more work that's required and more maintenance, obviously, if it's a type of partnership. But ultimately, I'm having to probably spend less money acquiring customers and all this type of stuff, and I'm still making far more money per customer than I was doing it the other way. So
yeah, for sure, man. Yeah, and I mean, which we didn't even get into this piece of it, but like I had somebody, it was like a client tell me the other day, we were talking about snapshots, and they were like, man, to really do this well, like you have to have like automation experience, tech experience, marketing experience, like funnel experience, like conversational interfaces experience. And so it's like, to really like you're kind of like one of the most valuable assets like in a business, like if you have the capacity to wear like all of those hats, which you need to be able to structure a full snapshot in many ways. And so that's a good position to be in, you know what I'm saying? Like to be in a spot where you're kind of not irreplaceable, but like it's a good spot when people come to you and say, hey, like, where can I find another Zach in the community? And you're like,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
can't,
I've asked
you
that.
can't find another Zach. Sorry to tell you. So,
Well,
no, but I'm
that's
just
the
kidding.
thing.
No.
If you have those skills, then they're so in demand that you can leverage them with partnerships, and you can make
Exactly.
a amount of money. So, like, there's a serious thing that should be considered as to whether or not you kind of pursue that path, maybe instead of just trying to create a bunch of generic snapshots. You're able to add more value to businesses when
Yeah.
you customizing it. So
Yeah.
I also like the model of, Josh Nelson, 7-figure agency. He's going to be more along the lines of let me dominate HVAC, and if I'm going to scale nationwide HVAC agency, right? Like niche down and go high level and own that snapshot. You want it to be the best it can be so that you can automate and grow and scale within a certain niche. I don't know if we've really talked about that model.
And like, I feel like I was thinking about this today. I definitely feel like that's possible. But what I feel like what I think that most agencies do is they create kind of the bare minimum type of snapshot, for their clients, and then they just run it. So it has lead nurture sequence, maybe it has database reactivation, but it's pretty simple. You know what I'm saying? It's nothing that's super complex.
Generic across all businesses.
Kind of, for at least the agencies that I've seen with the snapshots that they're using for their clients. I think that there's a lot of value if you were to deep dive and go super hard into creating a really awesome snapshot for one of your clients. Then you have a business model that you have proven that it works, and you have numbers, and you can prove that it works.
Yeah.
At that point, you can make the argument that if you want to join my agency and have us work with you, we're going to deliver these types of results, but you got to change your business to look like this. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to mention too was it seems like a lot of this is built around workflows. I feel like the only thing, the visual element, is the funnels, and then the funnels get complex because you have the copywriting, and then you also have the offer. And so when someone's coming to you wanting a snapshot, yes, there's automated reviews, and there's automated appointment reminders and missed call text back, and there's all this kind of generic stuff that I feel like you could plug into almost any business, birthday campaigns, holiday newsletters, a lot of generic stuff. But I also think that when they want a dental snapshot, they want the funnel. They want the funnel, and they want the offer, and above and beyond that, they would also love to have the ad copy and the Facebook ads and the images.
Yeah.
And so we start to step back to acquisition, and so it's like, okay, so I could build out this generic small business snapshot, but then the only thing I would really need is the funnel and the offer. And then, like, dentist and medical has a certain vibe, like a certain, aesthetic, versus a service-based business versus something else. But
yeah, I totally, dude, I totally agree with you. Like, and I think I forgot to mention this earlier, which is that in order to really create an excellent snapshot, it's not just all the workflows, but it's also a series of offers, and it's a series of ads, and a series of funnels for these things.
Yeah.
Right. So now, and this is where it's difficult to go super hard in the snapshot that's generic, is that you now have to not only get people to buy into how the thing works operationally, but you also have to get them to buy into the offers that you make. Yeah. And now, if you're making any good offers, then you're actually adding a whole lot of value, and something that maybe isn't actually really it's something that maybe if you're working with a dentist, maybe a dentist isn't used to actually offering all these things stacked together, right? If you want to make a really good offer, that's actually going to get people in the door. So that's where more of, like, you can go. There's two ways of going about it: create something that's super generic that everyone's going to do, that everyone already does, that's going to get people no better results than what they're already getting, getting people. Or you can, if you work with a company directly and go super hard and, like, are willing to see, hey, how far you want to take this with this offer, you can make something that's, like, truly extraordinary.
Yeah, and a lot of the agencies that have got massive scale doing what you're talking about, James, like where they're they're really focusing on one niche. A lot of those big scale people, like they're even focused on like a subset of offers in that niche. Like for example, like I have some friends that like people would say they're in the wellness niche, like wellness centers and chiropractors, right? Well, that's kind of a big niche. And so like the spot of the niche that they're in is red light therapy, like that. And so it's like every offer that they have like out of the box as part of their system is like designed around red light. And so it's kind of like if you're a wellness center and you offer that modality, like you're a candidate to be an agency client. But if you're not, and the same thing could be true like in home services. Like there's agencies that focus like purely on like window cleaning, purely on pressure washing, whereas like a lot of home services companies offer pressure washing, window cleaning, carpet cleaning, like, and a whole bunch of like, so it's kind of interesting because it's like if you're one of those pressure washing companies, like you could have like 3 agencies working for you, like one's handling all your pressure washing, one's handling all the window cleaning, but anyway.
Yeah, I think there's definitely multiple ways to go about it, guys. As we wrap this episode up, which I think has been awesome.
How long has it been going now?
Probably at least an hour and a half. I think we should ask feedback of those. If you guys like this style, this format, if you guys got value, definitely let us know in the comments. Guys, any last kind of thoughts as we wrap this up? And just thanks for anyone who's stuck with us this whole way.
Let's see.
I think we should just ask, to your point, James, like, guys, like we're kind of, like this is a new journey for us. We're trying to figure out what to talk about that's like valuable to people. We're trying to figure out like if the format by which we're giving the information to you is structured such that like you could consume it and find it interesting and all that. So like, if there's things that you guys want us to talk about or things that you think need to be addressed inside of the community that we haven't addressed yet, like, we'd love to hear about those. I don't know if we'll put like a link or something, for people.
Feedback would be fantastic.
Yeah.
Because we're very much at the stage where we're trying to figure out what would be most helpful for people.
Yeah.
And
we already know that we want to include some more visuals, of some of the frameworks that we're thinking through, the diagrams, but yeah. So any final?
Yeah, it's kind of a balance between, having a conversational format and also having an educational format that's also conducive to people really understanding higher level concepts. So we're going to try to do a better job of balancing, but we wanted to get this first episode out. I'm really glad that we did.
Okay, guys, let us know what you think.
I don't have any closing thoughts.
Okay.
Okay,
guys, let us know what you think, and hopefully you guys found some value in that, and we'll catch you in the next episode of GHL Wizards.
See you guys.